In Cedarwood, a town where everyone knew everyone, Sheriff Thomas Grayson wasn't just the law, he was a symbol of integrity. The townsfolk trusted him to keep their families safe, their streets quiet, and their worries at bay. He was the one you turned to when life unraveled. But what happens when the man who's supposed to uphold justice becomes the one who shatters it? One secret, buried deep in the shadows of his seemingly perfect life, would ignite a chain of events that no one in Cedarwood could have imagined. Imagine a man who walked into the diner every morning, greeting locals with a warm smile and a friendly nod. To everyone in Cedarwood, Sheriff Grayson was the kind of man you'd trust with your deepest fears. He had a reputation for being dependable, a devoted husband to Helen and a proud father of two. His image was spotless. But beneath the polished badge and easy charm, there was a secret so devastating that it would bring an entire town to its knees. A secret that would turn trust into betrayal, love into anger, and admiration into sheer disbelief. This isn't just a story about one man's choices. It's a chilling examination of what happens when power and trust are abused. When the truth begins to unravel, it forces us to ask, what happens when the protector becomes the predator? How far would someone go to keep their secrets locked away, even when the cost is paid in blood? Before we uncover the twists, the betrayals, and the shocking end to this story, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more gripping narratives that reveal the darkest sides of human behavior. Get ready, because what happened in Cedarwood will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust and power. For 15 years, Thomas Grayson was the heart of Cedarwood. As the sheriff, his name was synonymous with safety and stability. Whether it was calming an argument at the local bar or leading a search party to find a lost child, Thomas was always the first to step in, earning the unwavering trust of the town's 8,000 residents. He was more than a lawman, he was a fixture of the community. At Sunday service, he sat proudly in the front pew with his wife Helen, a beloved school teacher known for her kind heart and gentle demeanor. Together they raised two children, Ethan and Rachel, both of whom were away at college, leaving the Graysons to enjoy the quiet comfort of their picturesque home on Pinecrest Lane. To everyone in Cedarwood, Thomas Grayson had it all: a loving family, a stellar career, and the admiration of an entire town. He was the kind of man fathers wanted their daughters to date and young men aspired to emulate. Yet, behind the smiles and handshakes, there was a growing void, a creeping dissatisfaction that even Thomas couldn't fully understand. On the opposite end of Cedarwood's social spectrum was Emma Collins, a 17-year-old high school senior with dreams that reached far beyond the limits of her small town. With her worn sneakers and secondhand notebooks, she worked tirelessly at the Cedarwood Diner to save up for college, a future she desperately hoped would include journalism school in the city. Emma's home life, however, was anything but hopeful. Her mother, Lisa, was a shell of the vibrant woman she once was, consumed by addiction and unable to provide the support Emma needed. The responsibility of keeping their modest home afloat often fell squarely on Emma's shoulders, leaving her exhausted and longing for an escape. Despite the weight of her circumstances, Emma remained a spark of light. Her quick wit and determined spirit made her a favorite among the diner's regulars. She would scribble down notes between shifts, jotting ideas for articles she hoped to write someday, pieces about resilience, small-town struggles, and the stories no one else cared to tell. It started innocently enough. Thomas was a regular at the diner, often stopping in before his morning patrols for a black coffee and a slice of pie. Emma, always eager to please, made sure his cup was never empty and his pie was served warm. Over time, their exchanges grew from polite pleasantries to longer conversations. Thomas saw something in Emma that struck a chord: her determination, her grit, her eagerness to rise above her circumstances. It reminded him of the younger version of himself, back when his life still held the promise of adventure and purpose. In her, he saw a glimmer of something he felt he'd lost. For Emma, Thomas was everything her world lacked: stability, kindness, and a sense of protection. He was the only person who asked about her future, encouraged her dreams, and treated her like she mattered. While others dismissed her as just another small-town girl, Thomas made her feel seen. The conversations deepened. Thomas began offering Emma advice about her college aspirations, even suggesting she look into scholarships he could help her find. She started looking forward to his visits, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, the way his words felt like a promise that things could get better. What began as a mentorship slowly shifted into something else. Thomas started lingering at the counter a little longer, his eyes meeting hers with a new intensity. Emma, who had always felt invisible, basked in his attention. She didn't see a married man or the sheriff of Cedarwood. She saw someone who believed in her, someone who cared. For Thomas, Emma became a refuge from the growing monotony of his life. At home, his marriage with Helen had grown distant, their conversations reduced to polite exchanges about bills and grocery lists. His children were living their own lives, and the once thriving relationship he had with his wife felt more like a partnership of convenience than love. Emma's admiration was intoxicating. She listened to his stories with wide-eyed wonder, laughed at his jokes, and hung on to his every word. For the first time in years, Thomas felt alive, needed, even. Their bond was a secret shared only between the two of them. The early mornings at the diner became the highlight of Thomas's day, and Emma found herself glancing at the clock during shifts, waiting for him to walk through the door. They thought they were careful, but Cedarwood was a small town, and people were beginning to notice. Emma's best friend, Sophie Taylor, couldn't help but wonder why Emma had become so secretive lately. The way she lit up whenever Sheriff Grayson came in didn't go unnoticed. Meanwhile, Thomas's deputy, Caleb Mason, started raising an eyebrow at how often Thomas found excuses to stop by the diner, sometimes twice in one day. What neither Thomas nor Emma could see was how fragile their connection truly was. The very qualities that brought them together, her innocence and his authority, were the same forces that could tear them apart. The world around them was starting to watch, and the line they had already crossed was about to set events in motion that no one in Cedarwood could stop. What started as casual exchanges of encouragement turned into whispered conversations in the dimly lit corners of the diner, and lingering glances that lasted a little too long. Sheriff Thomas Grayson, a man who had built his entire life on the foundations of respect and trust, found himself in a place he never imagined. Emma Collins, the bright but vulnerable 17-year-old with dreams far beyond Cedarwood, became more than just a comforting presence. She became an escape. At first, Thomas justified it all. He told himself it wasn't wrong, just two people finding solace in each other's company. But as their conversations grew more personal, their boundaries began to blur. It started with Thomas offering to drive Emma home after a late shift, ensuring she didn't have to walk alone. Those rides turned into long talks in his truck, parked just out of sight, where they shared secrets, laughter, and eventually something much deeper. Emma, longing for stability and love in a world that had given her so little, fell quickly and deeply. She began to see Thomas as her way out, a protector who could shield her from the chaos of her life and provide her with the kind of care she had never known. Thomas, flattered by her adoration, basked in the feeling of being needed. Their relationship, though hidden from prying eyes, became a lifeline for them both. Thomas would send Emma texts under the table during family dinners, and Emma would light up whenever she saw his truck pull up outside the diner. It was thrilling, intoxicating, and entirely unsustainable. It didn't take long for the cracks to form. Emma, young and impressionable, grew emotionally attached to Thomas in ways he hadn't anticipated. She would text him late at night, asking when they could see each other again, or confiding in him about her struggles at home. At first, Thomas found it endearing, even rewarding to be her source of comfort, but as her need for his attention grew, so did his unease. The paranoia started creeping in. Thomas began second-guessing every interaction in public, wondering if someone had seen the way Emma looked at him, or if her friends had noticed how often he stopped by the diner. His wife Helen started commenting on his late nights at the station, and Thomas found himself scrambling for excuses. Meanwhile, Emma's life at school and home started shifting in ways she couldn't hide. Her best friend Sophie Taylor noticed her sudden mood swings, her distracted demeanor, and the way she clutched her phone like it held the answers to her future. Sophie pressed her, but Emma brushed it off, claiming she was just stressed about college applications. But rumors in a small town spread like wildfire. A whispered comment here, a raised eyebrow there. It wasn't long before people began to notice how much time Sheriff Grayson spent at the diner, or how Emma seemed unusually cheerful whenever he was around. Emma, caught up in the whirlwind of her emotions, ignored the warning signs. She started imagining a future with Thomas, a life where they could be together openly, where he would leave his wife and they could start fresh, somewhere far away from Cedarwood. For Thomas, however, the reality of their situation was closing in. Every time Helen mentioned a church fundraiser or a neighbor's casual observation about how often he was at the diner, his heart raced. He started avoiding Emma's calls and texts, claiming he was busy with work. The thrill that once defined their relationship was replaced by an overwhelming fear of being exposed. Sophie, unable to shake her suspicions, began paying closer attention to Emma's behavior. One day, she caught a glimpse of Emma's phone while they were sitting in the school cafeteria. The text on the screen, from a number saved as TM, read, "Can't talk." "What's going on, Emma?" Sophie asked, her voice laced with concern. "You've been so weird lately. Who's TC?" Emma flushed, quickly locking her phone. "No one," she muttered, but her tone betrayed her. Sophie wasn't convinced. The whispers began in earnest. Emma's unexplained absences from after-school activities, the way she seemed to light up when Sheriff Grayson walked into the diner, and Sophie's growing doubts all started to create a narrative that Cedarwood wasn't ready to face. For Thomas and Emma, their once secret relationship was becoming dangerously close to exposure, and in a town like Cedarwood, where everyone knew everyone's business, the stakes couldn't have been higher. It was a cold November afternoon when Emma Collins sat in her tiny bathroom, staring at the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. Her heart pounded, a whirlwind of fear, hope, and disbelief coursing through her veins. At just 17 years old, she was going to be a mother, and the father was the most powerful man in Cedarwood, Sheriff Thomas Grayson. Emma wasn't sure how Thomas would react, but deep down she believed the news would bring them closer. To her, the baby symbolized the love they had shared, a physical manifestation of the promises he had made during their stolen moments together. She envisioned a life where Thomas would leave his wife, Helen, and they could start fresh, far away from the judgmental eyes of Cedarwood. When she told Thomas, she was almost breathless with anticipation, hoping to see joy in his eyes. Instead, his reaction sent her world crashing down. Thomas froze, the color draining from his face as her words sank in. "You're... what?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm pregnant, Thomas," Emma repeated, her voice shaky but filled with determination. "We're going to have a baby." For a man who had built his life on control and precision, this news was the ultimate nightmare. Thomas didn't see a future of love and new beginnings. He saw the end of everything he had worked so hard to protect. His career, his reputation, his marriage, and his carefully curated image as Cedarwood's trusted sheriff were all hanging by a thread. This can't happen," he said, his voice rising as panic set in. "Do you have any idea what this could do to me? To us?" Emma's heart shattered at his words. She had expected hesitation, maybe even fear, but not this. "Thomas, this is our child," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "How can you say that? I thought you loved me." Thomas couldn't look her in the eyes. "Emma, you don't understand. This will ruin everything, for both of us." The revelation drove a wedge between them, and their once secret relationship quickly descended into turmoil. Thomas became cold and distant, avoiding Emma's calls and texts. When they did speak, their conversations were laced with tension and desperation. "We need to keep this quiet," Thomas insisted during one of their heated exchanges in the parking lot behind the diner. "No one can know about this, not your friends, not your mom, no one." "And what about the baby?" Emma shot back, her voice filled with defiance. "Do you expect me to just pretend it doesn't exist?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched across his face. "I'm trying to protect you. If people find out about us, they'll destroy you, Emma. Do you get that? They'll call you a homewrecker, a liar, and worse." Emma wasn't buying his excuses. She saw through the facade, recognizing his true fear, losing his perfect life. "This isn't about protecting me," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "This is about protecting yourself. But guess what, Thomas? I'm not going to hide. I won't let you pretend this never happened." When Thomas suggested that they leave Cedarwood together to escape the inevitable scandal, Emma's hope briefly flickered, only to be extinguished when she realized he wasn't offering a life together, he was offering an escape plan to avoid responsibility. "I'm not running away," Emma declared. "This is your child, Thomas. You don't get to just walk away from this." Her refusal to comply pushed Thomas to his breaking point. He begged, he threatened, and he manipulated, but Emma stood her ground. She was done being a secret. Unbeknownst to Thomas, Emma had begun documenting their relationship in a worn leather journal she kept hidden beneath her bed. At first, the entries were filled with the kind of hopeful musings only a teenager in love could write. She detailed their stolen moments together, the way Thomas made her feel safe and special, and her dreams of a future where they could be a family. But as their relationship began to crumble, the tone of her writing shifted. The pages were soon filled with anger, heartbreak, and despair. She wrote about Thomas's broken promises, his coldness, and his growing paranoia. She poured her emotions onto the pages, desperate for an outlet to process the betrayal she felt. "I trusted him," one entry read. "He told me he loved me, that we'd be together, but now all he cares about is his reputation. How can someone who says they love you hurt you this much?" The journal became Emma's lifeline, a place where she could be honest about the pain she carried. But it was more than just a diary, it was evidence. Emma knew that if Thomas ever tried to deny their relationship or abandon her completely, the journal would expose the truth. The final entry before the events took a tragic turn read, "I won't let him control me anymore. He thinks he can silence me, but he's wrong. This baby is proof of what we had, and no matter what he says or does, I won't let him take that away from me." Emma's resolve was stronger than ever, but she underestimated just how far Thomas would go to protect his secrets. The revelation of the pregnancy had set off a chain reaction, and as their relationship continued to unravel, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change their lives and Cedarwood forever. It was a cold, moonless night when Emma Collins made her way to the abandoned lake house on the outskirts of Cedarwood. The wind howled through the trees, and the creaking of the old structure added an eerie soundtrack to the confrontation that was about to unfold. Emma had chosen this spot deliberately, away from prying eyes, a place where their secrets had once felt safe. Now, it would bear witness to a confrontation that had been brewing for weeks. Thomas Grayson arrived late, his demeanor tense. He parked his truck a distance away to avoid drawing attention, his heart pounding as he walked toward the lake house. The glow of a single lantern inside the decrepit building illuminated Emma's silhouette, standing firm despite her slight frame. She wasn't the naive girl who had once hung on his every word. Tonight she was a young woman demanding accountability. "I'm done hiding," Emma said as Thomas stepped inside, her voice steady but tinged with anger. "You've been stringing me along for months, and I won't let you manipulate me anymore. I deserve better than this. Our child deserves better." Thomas clenched his jaw, his hands trembling as he tried to mask the panic rising within him. "Emma, you don't understand. This isn't just about us. It's about my family, my career, everything I've worked for. If this gets out, it'll destroy everything." Emma laughed bitterly, her eyes narrowing as she took a step closer. "Destroy everything? You mean destroy you? What about me, Thomas? What about the fact that I'm carrying your child while you go home every night to your perfect little family? I'm done being your secret." As the tension escalated, Emma dropped a bombshell. "I've been keeping a journal. Everything is in there, dates, places, everything you've ever said to me. And if anything happens to me, I've made sure someone will find it, so don't even think about trying to silence me." Thomas's face paled. The thought of that journal terrified him more than anything else. If the contents were exposed, he wouldn't just lose his job and marriage, he'd face public humiliation, criminal charges, and the complete collapse of his carefully constructed life. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, his voice shaking. "You're playing a dangerous game, Emma." "No, Thomas," she shot back. "You are. and I'm done letting you win." The argument spiraled out of control, each accusation and demand pushing them closer to the edge. Emma was resolute, refusing to back down, and her defiance only fueled Thomas's frustration. "I want you to leave your wife," Emma demanded, her voice rising. "I want you to take responsibility for this baby and give us the life we deserve. And if you don't, I swear, I'll go to the police, the press, anyone who will listen. Cedarwood deserves to know the truth about their beloved sheriff." Thomas's mask of composure finally cracked. The weight of Emma's threats, the looming scandal, and his own guilt boiled over into blind rage. "You don't understand what you're doing to me," he shouted, advancing toward her. Emma stood her ground, her hands clenched into fists. "No, Thomas, you don't understand what you've done to me. You used me, you lied to me, and now, you're going to face the consequences." The argument reached its breaking point when Emma turned to leave, her hand on the journal tucked in her bag. "I'm done talking. You can tell Helen yourself or I'll do it for you." In a moment of desperation, Thomas grabbed her arm, yanking her back. "You're not going anywhere," he said through gritted teeth. "Let me go!" Emma screamed, struggling to break free. The scuffle escalated, and in the chaos, Thomas shoved Emma with all his strength. She stumbled backward, her foot catching on the edge of the rug. Before she could regain her balance, her head struck the jagged edge of the stone fireplace with a sickening crack. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Thomas's ragged breathing. He stared in horror as Emma's lifeless body crumpled to the floor, blood pooling beneath her head. For a moment Thomas was frozen, his mind racing to comprehend the gravity of what had just happened. Emma Collins, the girl he had once claimed to love, was dead, and it was his fault. Panic set in as he replayed the scene in his mind. He knew there was no coming back from this. If anyone found out, his life was over. He had to think fast. With trembling hands, Thomas began to stage the scene. He rifled through Emma's bag, taking her journal and shoving it into his jacket pocket. He scattered the contents of her purse across the floor, making it look like a robbery gone wrong. Then he wrapped her body in an old tarp he found in the corner of the lake house. Carrying her lifeless form to his truck, Thomas avoided the main roads, driving deep into the woods where the towering pines offered a dark sanctuary for his grim task. He buried her in a shallow grave beneath a bed of leaves and dirt, whispering a prayer for forgiveness as he worked. When it was done, he drove home, his mind racing with excuses and alibis. He scrubbed the truck clean, burned the tarp, and discarded Emma's phone in a river miles away. But no matter how hard he tried to cover his tracks, the weight of what he had done lingered like a shadow he could never escape. Thomas believed he had silenced Emma forever, but he had underestimated the ripple effects of her disappearance and the secrets she had left behind. Cedarwood was a small town, the kind where everyone knew everyone else, and the days were measured in the rhythm of familiar routines. But all that changed the moment Emma Collins vanished. The news hit like a thunderclap, leaving the community reeling. For days the town was frozen in a haze of confusion, fear, and heartbreak. The search for Emma became the focus of every waking moment in Cedarwood. Her face was plastered on every street corner, every storefront, and every social media feed. Missing person flyers fluttered in the wind, and volunteers, some with no real connection to her, gathered to comb the woods, the fields, and the quiet back roads. They wanted answers, and they wanted them fast. As sheriff, Thomas Grayson took charge of the search, his calm exterior hiding a storm of dread brewing beneath. He led the efforts with his usual poise, but there was a coldness to his actions. He appeared every bit the concerned lawman, but his eyes betrayed him. The questions, the stares, the whispers. He had to keep it all under control. He wasn't just searching for Emma, he was desperately trying to cover his tracks. Every time a lead surfaced, Thomas was there too quickly, offering vague suggestions, misdirecting investigators, and subtly deflecting suspicion from himself. He was the trusted sheriff, the man who had the town's best interests at heart. No one could imagine that he might have been the one to bring so much grief to Cedarwood. But Thomas wasn't as clever as he thought. His every move was being watched. Closely, quietly. Deputy Caleb Mason had only been with the Cedarwood Police Department for 2 years, but he was sharp, Too sharp, perhaps. He had looked up to Thomas from day one, admiring the seasoned sheriff's cool-headed nature and the respect he commanded from the community. But Caleb couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. As the search for Emma dragged on with no leads, Caleb started noticing inconsistencies in Thomas's behavior. The way he avoided certain questions, the way his eyes darted when he was asked about the last time he saw Emma. It wasn't enough to raise immediate suspicion, but it was enough to make Caleb uneasy. Then there was the matter of the alibi. Thomas had claimed to be at home with his wife Helen when Emma disappeared. But something didn't add up. There was no trace of Emma at the Grayson household, and Helen had been asleep all night. No one had seen Thomas leaving or coming back from the lake house. Caleb dug deeper, growing increasingly unsettled by the sheriff's refusal to answer certain questions directly. It wasn't long before another lead surfaced that made Caleb's stomach turn. Sophie Taylor, one of Emma's closest friends, came forward with a cryptic revelation. Sophie had noticed strange behavior from Emma in the weeks before her disappearance. Emma had become distant, secretive, and withdrawn. At first, Sophie thought it was just the stress of senior year. But then, Emma had dropped a bombshell, something she hadn't told anyone. But now, Sophie couldn't keep it to herself. Emma kept talking about a man in power, someone who could ruin everything for her, Sophie explained to the police. She wouldn't tell me who, but she said if she ever went missing, people would know. She wasn't going to let him get away with it. The words hit Caleb like a punch to the gut. A man in power? Someone who could ruin Emma's life? It didn't take long for him to put two and two together. The only person in town who fit that description perfectly was Thomas Grayson. With the mounting pressure on his shoulders and growing doubts about Thomas's involvement, Caleb decided to take matters into his own hands. He needed proof, something that would finally tie Thomas to Emma's disappearance. One evening, as the investigation hit another dead end, Caleb returned to the lake house. It was an eerie place now, no longer a quiet retreat but a crime scene that held too many unanswered questions. The house was cold, empty, and cloaked in silence. But Caleb wasn't there to search for the obvious. He knew what he had to find, and he was determined to uncover. In the dim light of the old house, Caleb methodically searched through the debris, every step echoing in the hollow space. When he entered the small living room, something caught his eye. A faint outline of charred paper poking out from beneath the remnants of the fireplace. He knelt down, his heart racing as he pulled out what appeared to be a partially burned journal. He flipped through the scorched pages, reading hastily written entries that had survived the fire. Emma's handwriting was unmistakable, and with each word the picture became clearer. She had kept a detailed account of her affair with Thomas, of their secret meetings, and, most damning of all, her discovery of the pregnancy. Caleb's hands trembled as he pieced together the heartbreaking truth of what had transpired between them. Emma had written everything. The lies, the promises, the manipulation. And now, as he read her final entries, Caleb understood just how desperate she had become. She had known her life was at risk, and she had been determined to expose Thomas, even if it meant sacrificing her own future. But now, her journal was the only thing that could bring justice, and Thomas knew it. Caleb's discovery had just opened a door that would shatter the very foundation of Cedarwood's trust in their sheriff. The question now was whether Thomas could escape the web he had so carefully woven around himself, or whether Caleb's persistence would be the end of his reign. As Caleb tucked the journal into his coat and left the lake house, the weight of what he had just uncovered settled heavily on his shoulders. He had the evidence. Now, all he had to do was confront the man who had built his empire on lies. The walls of the Cedarwood Sheriff's Office were thick with tension as Deputy Caleb Mason stared down the man he had once admired. Thomas Grayson, the sheriff of Cedarwood for over 15 years, sat in the same chair he had occupied countless times before, his face an unreadable mask. But Caleb had the evidence now. The forensic team had found traces of Emma's blood at the lake house, on the fireplace, on the carpet, and in the dirt near where she had fallen. But it wasn't just the blood that was damning, it was Emma's journal, the one Caleb had painstakingly recovered from the ashes of the burned house. Page after page, Emma had detailed everything. The affair, the lies, the pregnancy, and, most damning of all, her threats to expose Thomas if anything happened to her. Caleb placed the journal on the desk in front of Thomas, its pages spread wide, revealing the truth for all to see. The sheriff's cold demeanor faltered for the briefest moment, but he quickly regained control. "Caleb," Thomas said, his voice hoarse, his eyes fixed on the journal, "you don't understand. I did what I had to do. You weren't there. You don't know what she was like. She—" "Stop," Caleb interrupted, his voice steady but firm. "I know exactly what you did, Thomas. We all do. Now. Emma's journal says it all. You were the one who pushed her, the one who killed her. And you thought you could get away with it." The weight of those words hit Thomas like a physical blow. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time in what felt like forever, his facade cracked. With the room heavy with silence, Thomas knew the truth had finally caught up with him. The life he had spent years cultivating, his family, his career, his position of power, was crumbling around him. He tried to fight it, to hold on to the last shred of control, but it was no use. "All right," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible. "I did it. I killed her." Caleb's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't let himself react. This confession was the moment of reckoning, the moment that would break the town's heart and bring justice for Emma. The news spread like wildfire through Cedarwood. The sheriff, the man who had always been the town's moral compass, the man they had trusted to protect them, had betrayed them in the most horrifying way imaginable. People gathered in shock, their faces a mixture of disbelief and anger. How could this happen? How could they have missed the signs? Helen Grayson, Thomas's wife, was the first to make her public stance. Within days of the confession, she filed for divorce, citing Thomas's actions as excusable and a betrayal of everything they had built together. Their once perfect life, one that had appeared so enviable to outsiders, had been shattered. Helen disappeared into the privacy of her grief, but the devastation was evident to all who had once admired her. For Lisa Collins, Emma's mother, the pain was unbearable. She had already suffered so much raising her daughter alone, watching Emma struggle through a difficult home life, only for the young girl to be taken from her in such a brutal, senseless way. Lisa demanded justice with every breath. She stood outside the courthouse, her fists clenched in silent rage, as the town was divided. Some struggled to reconcile the man they had known with the monster that had been hiding in plain sight. Others couldn't bring themselves to believe it, no matter the evidence, no matter the confession. But as the days passed, the truth became undeniable. Cedarwood's sheriff had broken the town's trust in the worst way possible. When the trial finally began, it was the spectacle everyone had feared it would be. The town packed the courthouse, their eyes fixed on the man who had once been the very symbol of law and order. Thomas sat in the defendant's chair, looking older than his years, his once confident demeanor reduced to a broken shell of a man. The prosecution laid out the case against him with precision. The forensic evidence, the blood at the lake house, the damning journal with Emma's own words condemning Thomas. The emotional toll of the case weighed heavily on everyone involved, but none more so than Lisa Collins, who sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she clutched the photograph of her daughter. Thomas's defense team tried to paint a different picture, that Emma had somehow provoked him, that she had been the one to threaten him with exposure. But the evidence was clear. Thomas had been the one in control, and his actions had led to Emma's death. The trial lasted only a week, but it felt like an eternity. The jury deliberated for just a few hours before returning with their verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The room was dead silent as the judge pronounced the sentence. Thomas's face was impassive, but the defeat in his eyes was unmistakable. He had betrayed everything: his family, his town, his oath as sheriff, and now he would pay the price. The case of Sheriff Thomas Grayson was a stark reminder of the consequences that come when those in power misuse their influence. It was a tragic story, one that revealed how easily trust could be shattered and how a single mistake, one moment of rage and desperation, could destroy an entire life. Thomas's actions didn't just end Emma's life. They shattered a town's belief in the people they trusted to protect them. The betrayal cut deep, and as Cedarwood tried to heal, the question that lingered was impossible to ignore. Could this tragedy have been prevented if someone had spoken up sooner? In a world where power, secrets, and lies can so easily go unchecked, how do communities hold authority figures accountable before it's too late? The darkness had taken root, and now, the town of Cedarwood would have to find a way to move forward, knowing that the man who had sworn to protect them was the one who had caused the most irreparable harm. If this story shook you to your core, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. We'll continue to bring you gripping crime stories that reveal the darkest corners of human nature, the stories you won't believe but that happen every day.